Okay, Rabbi Sai. This is the second class on the Maamar. Beshah Shehekdemu Yisrael Nasal Nishma Tafshin Chaf Hei. The previous class was an introduction, and this class in all likely will continue to be an introduction. In yesterday's class, we learned basically two things. Number one, that the deepest aspect of this Maamar, and really the deepest aspect of the creation, is the idea that Yisrael olu b'machshava, that Yidden are rooted in Atzmos Mamish, and that is the source of everything that follows. Even though the Yid actually exists at the end of the line, at the end of Ishtalshlus in Gashmias, but his presence in Gashmias is olu b'machshava, is the Seif Maisa olu b'machshava Tchila, is part of Hashem's original thought. And specifically, according to the powerful Torah of the Maggid, that because by Hashem there's no Zman, so there was never a time that Yidden were not part of the Eibish's imagination, like a father never forgets his child. And when you learn this Maamar and you go deeper and deeper and deeper, the deepest depth is this idea that Yidden are mushrish. Yidden have a root in Atzmos Hussein Sav Baruch Hu, and it's the root of the Jewish people in Atzmos Hussein Sav Baruch Hu, which sets up all of Seder Ishtalshelus. That was the first thing we learned yesterday. The second thing we learned yesterday is a proof for this. And the proof is based on the Pasuk in Mishlei, K'mayim aponim laponim kein leiv adam ala adam. Like water reflects the face, looks into it, so a heart reflects the heart of his friend that looks into his heart. And in the mashal, the simple understanding, in psychological terms, Kamayim aponim laponim kein leiv adam ala adam is a profound and obvious idea. But in this Maamar, Kamayim laponim laponim kein leiv adam ala adam, of course it's based on the second chilek in Ayin Beis, is talking about a lakus. And Kamayim aponim laponim is the mashal, and kein leiv adam ala adam is the nimshal. What is the mashal of Kamayim aponim laponim? That Atzilus, the spheres of Atzilus, look into the pshitas of Ein Seif, like a face of Adam Ha'elyon looks into the pshit, into water, into the pshitas of Ein Seif, and then Ein Seif reflects it back. That's the mashal. How Ein Seif reflects the essence spheres of Atzilus that look into it. Kein leiv adam ala adam, so too the heart of Adam Ha'elyon reflects the heart of Adam HaTachton. Leiv Adam means Adam of Atzilus. El Ha'adam means Adam of Asiyah. That when Adam of Asiyah, which Alter Rebbe in Tanya Perek Dal calls Adam HaTachton, looks at the Pnei of Adam Ha'elyon, which of the spheres of Atzilus, so the Adam Ha'elyon reflects back on Adam HaTachton what is being shown to Adam Ha'elyon. So the mashal is Atzilus looking into Ein Seif, and Ein Seif reflecting it back. And the nimshal is Asiyah looking into Atzilus, and Atzilus reflecting it back. So there's an obvious question. That when you have a mashal and a nimshal, the mashal has to be easier to understand than the nimshal. And in this case, the mashal is harder to understand than the nimshal, because the distance between Atzilus and Ein Seif is greater than the distance between Asiyah and Atzilus. This is one of the questions that's important in this Maamar. And the ultimate answer to the question is that when it says Kein leiv adam ala adam, it doesn't only mean that Adam HaTachton, Adam of Asiyah, is reflected in Adam Ha'elyon of Atzilus, but it means how Adam HaTachton of Asiyah is reflected in Adam Ha'elyon of Atzilus, and the pshitas of Ein Seif, and in Ak, and in Lifnei Atzimtzum, in every madrega. How the physical Adam HaTachton, the Yid down here in this physical world, is the basis for the Hitztairus, for the Hisrakmus, of Spheres in Atzilus and in Ein Seif and in Ak and in Lifnei Atzimtzum, based on the first idea that I told you of Yisrael olu b'machshava. And this is the answer to the question. The question is going to be, how could Kamayim aponim laponim be a mashal and Kein leiv adam ala adam be a nimshal, according to Kabbalah, not according to Pshat? Because leiv adam ala adam is closer and Mayim aponim laponim is more remote. And the answer is because included in Leiv Adam ala Adam is not only Adam HaTachton and Adam Ha'elyon, but Adam HaTachton and all of Seder Ishtalshelus. At kan, until this point, is the chazorah of what we learned in yesterday's class. We're now going to continue the introduction. And today's class is very, very important. And as they say, I'm going to apologize only once. I hope that what I teach you is written here, and I'm not making anything up, chas v'shalom. But I'm going to share thoughts as an introduction to this Maamar, of course, based on my limited understanding. And it's controversial, it's not simple, because this Maamar isn't simple. And hopefully the Eibishter will help that I'll be mechaven lamitasa shel davar. Okay? In this Maamar, there is a form, there's a language used. It's not used that many times, but it's used enough, and this form and this language becomes very, very, very important. And the language and the form is pnimius v'chitzenius, or chitzenius or pnimius. Chitzenius means an outer dimension, and pnimius means an inner dimension. And I want to show you where these words are. I want to show you where these words are, if you're using a text, a PDF, because it's very important for you to see that this is grounded in the text of the Maamar. So you have to go all the way to page Reish Pei Tes. The first paragraph of Sif Tes, the last two lines reads, Al pi zeh be'eses sfiris hagenuz l'shnei inyonim, bechitzenius inyonim yechelis l'sfiris, u'bepnimius heimerein seif. You see those words, chitzenius and pnimius. And then the last two lines on the same page, the bottom of page Reish Pei Tes, again you have, inyonim be'eses sfiris hageluyes, bepnimius is agilid eses sfiris hagenuzes. Okay? And the chitzenius is different. And then if you turn to page Reish Tzadik, the line that begins with the word v'habiur, which is 10 lines on top of the page, it says Aideya Veda Shal Adam Atacht Mizgalis Hapnimius the Adam Elyon, which is Esesfiras Datzilus, which is Gilib Esesfiras Agenuzis, as opposed to Chitzenius. So you see here in Sif Tes, repeated a number of times, the terminology Pnimius and the terminology Chitzenius. Now, the terms Pnimius and Chitzenius are not new. I mean, any person who learns Chassidus, any person who participates in a Chassidische Farbrengen, any person who is involved in the Sichos that talk about the Nyonei Avodah, Al Pi Chassidus, understand the difference between Pnimius and Chitzenius. But in this particular instance, the terms Pnimius and Chitzenius are very serious, because it almost seems like Seder Hishtalshlus happens twice. What are the two happenings of Seder Hishtalshlus? The two happenings of Seder Hishtalshlus are, number one, Seder Hishtalshlus Kayochel, as the Eibishter made it before a person does anything about it. And number two, Seder Hishtalshlus as it happens after there is an Seder Milmata, as the Yid Avodah. The Seder Hishtalshlus, as Kvayochel, the Eibishter makes it, naturally is called Chitzenius. And the Seder Hishtalshlus, which is a consequence of the Avodah of a person, Milmata L'mayla, is called Pnimius. In other words, it's almost as if you were to say that when Hashem created the world, He created a whole Seder Hishtalshlus. There's Ein Seif, there's Tzimtzum, there's Ak, there's Ein Seif, there's Atzilus, there's Asiyah, and then there's Avodah. And because of Avodah, there is a reflecting back of Asiyah to Atzilus, Atzilus to Ein Seif, and so on, the Pshitas of Ein Seif. And then there is the reflecting back down again because of the Avodah. The second reflecting from the top down, which comes a consequence of Avodah, would be called Pnimius. And like I said to you before, it's almost like an Eryosha and like an Orchez, almost like as if Hishtalshlus is happening twice. The Maamar is very hard to understand because the Rebbe doesn't say explicitly that there's two Hishtalshlus, that there's two layers of how the worlds develop and unfold, the way it is by itself or the way it is because of its reflecting of Adam Atachna and Adam Elyon and so on. But when you learn the Maamar, whether this is actually two things, in other words, one reality before Adam and the other reality after Adam, or both realities happening simultaneously, which I'm not sure exactly how that could be understood, there's at least a philosophical division. And the philosophical division is how the Eibishter made Seder Ishtalshelus naturally Kvayachol, and how Seder Ishtalshelus is adapted or enriched because of the influence of Adam on Seder Ishtalshelus. And I would like to share with you what would be the difference between Seder Ishtalshelus as it is naturally and Seder Ishtalshelus as it's affected by the Adam Atachten and the Adam Elyon and the Ein Seif and so on. And basically the difference would be as follows. Ubagdama, just to say something very obvious and very plain. Hashem is one, and the world is many. Obvious. Right? Hashem is one, the world is many. Hashem is revealed, the world is a concealment. Hashem is a plainness, the world is a complexity. And so on. So the phenomena, the event of creation, which is of course the Eibishter Kvayochel radiating from heaven to earth, the Eibishter giving from himself to the creation, is an event of going from one to many, from formless to form, from unity to division, from pshitas to tzir, and so on. The idea that the Eibishter created a world, and of course, that the Eibishter created a world, he created the world from himself, or as Chassidus and Kabbalah would like to tweak, Hashem created the world from his Ein Sof, from his light. The process, the steps, the event of creation, of coming from a higher level to a lower level, is going from one to many, from plain to form, and so on and so forth. In other words, as you journey through Seder Ishtalshelus, as it is in the Chitzonius model, and the Chitzonius model means Kvayachos, the Eibishter created the world, so to speak, in a preliminary way, by itself, without the idea of Leiv Adam ala Adam, the influence of a person's avodah. This is the process. So Hashem is one, and the world is many. Hashem is plain, and the world is formed. So as you journey through Seder Ishtalshelus from a higher level to a lower level, the process is in effect going from one to many and from formless to form. From pshitas to tzir. The lower levels of Seder Ishtalshelus would be many. The lower levels of Seder Ishtalshelus would be form. The higher level of Ishtalshelus would be few, and the higher level of Seder Ishtalshelus would be pshitas. This is the design of the creation as the Eibishter made it. So when Hashem created the world, in the various levels and steps and worlds that are components of the creation, you have detail, you have form, and so on. But then you have, this is the Chitzonius Dika model. Then it's the Pnimius model. What's the Pnimius model? The Pnimius model is that the Adam HaTachten looks heavenward. The Adam HaElyon looks heavenward. Because the Eibishter created the world because of avodah, for service, for work. And the avodah, the service, the work comes from the bottom up because the essential component of the whole creation is at the very, very bottom, which is what we discussed yesterday, the idea of Yisrael Lo B'Machshava. And the concept would go like this, that the creation, the formed creation, looks from earth to heaven, from Adam HaTachten to Adam HaElyon, from heaven to the heaven of heavens, if you will, from Adam HaElyon to Ein Seif, Kamayim Aponim Leponim, and higher, and it imprints itself in the higher level. In other words, it's a backward Seder Ishtalshelus. It's not the Seder Ishtalshelus which coming down from a higher level to a lower level, from form to plainness, but rather where it's going from what's below to above. The lower reality, beginning with the person not here in the physical world, is looking into the heavens and imprinting himself on the heavens. And the heavens is looking into the heaven of the heaven and imprinting itself on that madrega, and higher and higher. What happens as a consequence? What happens as a consequence is that the creation, which is by itself on the lower levels, many. The creation, which by itself on the lower levels is division. The creation, which by itself on the lower level is form, is reflecting, is mirroring its many and its division and its form on the plainness of what's above. In other words, there's an imprint, there's a hitztairutz. I'm not going to use the word chakika, even though I'd like to use the word chakika, because in other places in Hasidus that word is used, but it's not used here, of the form on formlessness, of many on the one. The Ein Sof is one, the worlds are many. The lower world, the higher worlds are one, the lower worlds are many. And when the lower worlds look into the higher worlds, they impress an image on the higher worlds of what's themselves. Like the Pasuk says, Kamayim aponim leponim. Water is plain, has no predetermined image. And therefore, when a face looks into the water, the face that's going to look back at that person is going to be the face that looked into the water. Because since the water did not have a earlier form, it's going to reflect the form that looks into it. And the Rebbe goes on to say that this second dimension of Seder Ishtalshalos, which goes from the bottom up, rather from the top down, in other words, what the Maamar is going to be calling Pnimius, as opposed to Chitzenius, has a remarkable effect on Seder Ishtalshalos. What is the remarkable effect that it has on Seder Ishtalshalos? The remarkable effect it has on Seder Ishtalshalos is that form exists in plainness. That form exists in Ein Sof. When you look into water, you see yourself, but you're not in the water. The water is still plain. And yet the water is reflecting your image. This Maamar is teaching us, and this is going to be one of those ideas that we're going to have to struggle with, because it's not an easy concept to understand. That when the form of Ishtalshalos impresses itself on the pshitas of Ein Sof, like a human being who looks into water that has no predefinition, and therefore that water will reflect that human being's countenance back onto himself, you have how an image becomes a part of plainness. And when that image is reflected back to you, on the one hand it's an image, and on the other hand it's not an image at all. On the other hand it's a plainness. In other words, the pnimius of the worlds, which is a product of the bottom up, people, the purpose of creation, as opposed to the chitzonius of the worlds, is how godliness comes from the highest levels of Hishtalshalos down into the lowest level of Hishtalshalos, all the way down into this world in such a way that even though it has a form, because it's reflecting the form of the Adam HaTachten who was looking into it, because that form does not actually exist in the mirror, because that form does not actually exist in the water, so the form which is being reflected back is both a form and at the same time entirely not a form. In other words, the first Seder Ishtalshalos, the Chitzonius of Seder Ishtalshalos, which is actual Metzias, is actual Tzir, is actual limitation and diversity and division. The second Seder Ishtalshalos, because it's going backwards, the form is impressing itself on the formless. The limited and the diverse is impressing itself upon the unlimited and the plain. And then the plain is reflecting it back. When the plane mirrors it back from heaven to earth, it's reflecting back the form. But the way it's reflecting back that form is in and of itself Ein Sof. So the pnimius of Seder Ishtalshalos is very, very different than the chitzonius of Seder Ishtalshalos. Because the chitzonius of Seder Ishtalshalos, the natural Seder Ishtalshalos, as the Eibishter made it, is a world. Diversity, division, form. The pnimius of Seder Ishtalshalos, which comes from the bottom up, is how in the world is revealed in Ein Sof, that although it's reflecting the world and the person and the image which is looking at the Ein Sof, when the Ein Sof gives it back, that image is both an image and absolutely the plainness of Ein Sof. So the Rebbe is teaching us that The second Seder Ishtalshalos, the Pnimius Seder Ishtalshalos, the second stage of Seder Ishtalshalos is how Koyachal into the world comes Ein Seif at its most plainness, and at the same time it's absolutely coming into the world because it has a relationship to the form and to the image and to the vision of the world. Now, this is the basic idea. What I just shared you is the basic idea, and of course when we learn the Maamar, you will see how the Rebbe articulates this concept that because the water has no image, so when the image is reflected back by the water, on the water hand, that's the reason the water can reflect the image, because it has no pre-image. But on the other hand, when the water reflects back the image, on the one hand it's reflecting back an image, and on the other hand it's not an image at all, because the image is not in the water. So we'll revisit this in Mitzvah Hashem. We're going to go back to this in Mitzvah Hashem when we learn the actual Maamar. And I guess that at least in a basic way, you could say that the Rebbe is, so to speak, describing two worlds. The world as Hashem created it, and the world, how it's affected by people and what they do in serving Hashem. The world as Hashem created it is an actual world with limitation and division and form. The world as it's reflected back from heaven to earth, based on the avodah that we do, is how infinity and plainness and oneness converges, comes together with diversity and division and complexity, because the avodah of a person and the influence that the avodah of the person from the bottom of up has on Seder Ishtalshalos is that effect that there should be a combination, so to speak, of pshitas and siyur, form and formless, without either one of them being compromised. The formless is absolutely formless, the form is an actual form, and even though it's a form, it's still pshitus, it's still Ein Seif, and this allows for the pshitus of Ein Seif, the plainness of godliness, to converge with the complexity of world. That's in effect what I just said in the last few minutes. And like I said, in Mitzvah Hashem, when we learn the Maamar, this will become, I think, quite a bit clearer. But I want to keep talking. I want to talk some more. And what I'm going to say now is not in the Maamar. And I don't really need to share the information that follows. But I'm choosing to share the information that follows because I think it'll enhance the Maamar. To some people, it'll be extra confusion. But I think at the same time, certainly for people who have learned a little bit of Hasidus, or a little more than a little bit of Hasidus, it will enhance the Maamar. It'll enrich the Maamar even more. Okay? But before I tell you what I want to share now, let me just repeat to you what I said in the last 20 minutes or so. What I said was that when you learn this Maamar, you come away with the clear impression is that there's two layers to the Seder Ishtalshalos. There's two layers to the world that the Eibishter created, or the worlds that Hashem created. There is the chitzonius model of that, which is where Hashem created it naturally, by himself, unilaterally. And those worlds are complex, divided, and formed. And there is the inner dimension of all of that, which is affected by the work, the avodah that people do, that converges, it brings together the most plainness of the Ein Seif and the form of the world, because the form of the world impresses itself on the Ein Seif, so that the Ein Seif should reflect it back, itself back into the worlds. This is what I said so far. Now I want to go on to another discussion, which is not in our Maamar at all, but I think it'll enhance this discussion. If you can accept the terminologies, and I'd like you to accept the terminologies, and they're not my words, this is the Rebbe's words, yeah? He doesn't say them 100 times, but he says them enough times in Siftes. That there's, so to speak, two layers to the world. The chitzonius dika layer and the pnimius dika layer. The chitzonius dika layer is the layer that the Eibishter created, and the pnimius dika layer is the layer which is an effect of our reflecting ourselves upwards. And the light reflecting itself back down on us. So when you talk about the chitzonius of the world, the first model, where the Eibishter created the world, you have in the chitzonius model itself two shitas. You have in the Chitzenius model itself, you have two opinions. In other words, in the Chitzenius itself, there's two layers of the extent to which there is a form or a lack of form in Seder Ishtalshalos. These two opinions are called the Shita of Oires Mitzuyarim and the Shita of Oires Pshutim. The opinion that speaks about Ein Seif having tziyur, having sfidus, having images, having forms, and the Shita of Oires Pshutim, which means that the light, the Ein Seif, does not have any spheres, does not have any form. And I want to give you the background. I want to tell you where these two opinions about Oires Mitzuyarim and Oires Pshutim come from. One of the most difficult ideas, one of the most important ideas to understand in Kabbalah and in Chassidus is the question of Atzilus, the question of Adam Ha'elyon, the question of Sfidus, as it would be called in some cultures. And the question basically is, how can Atzilus exist? How can Sfidus exist? How can Adam Ha'elyon exist? And I'll explain the question to you. As you know, Kabbalah introduces to the paradigm of Jewish theology the concept of Ein Seif, which means godliness, not only God, but godliness, the light of Hashem, as it's explained in Chassidus, of course. As you further know, Kabbalah and Chassidus have introduced to the paradigm of Jewish theology the concept of the supernal man, of Adam Ha'elyon, of the image of God. That in Kabbalah, the image of God is a real thing. It doesn't only exist in the Nifal, it exists in the Pa'ula, although it doesn't exist in the Pa'il. In other words, there's actual Kalim, there's Sfidus. According to Kabbalah, there is a place, there is a level where Kvayachal Hashem has a form, and the light of Ein Seif manifests itself in that form. And that world, that place is called Atzilus. That place, that level is called Adam Ha'elyon. That place, that level is called Sfidus. In other words, Kabbalah has two big ideas. The first big idea is called Ma'od, which means the simple infinity of Ein Seif. The second big idea is called Adam. And Adam, man, means complexity. And the order of the complexity of man is Yamin, Smel, Emtza, Reish, Tech, Seif. A right, left, and a center, top and a middle, and a bottom. So there can be hiskalus and integration and so on. So here comes the $1,000,000 question. Atzilus is axiomatic to Kabbalah. Atzilus is absolutely axiomatic to Kabbalah. Why? Because you have two opposite things. What are the two opposite things? Number one, the pshitas of Ein Seif, the plainness of Ein Seif. Number two, the form and the complexity and the division of kalim, of vessels, and limitation of kalim. And the question becomes, how can two such opposite things, namely an Ein Seif, which is absolutely plain and transcendent and removed, and kalim, which are form and detail and division, converge? How can two opposite things come together? So, when you're talking about the worlds that are above Atzilus, and the worlds that are above Atzilus, the way these two things come together, because the light is so predominant that it overwhelms the vessels. The light of Ein Seif, in what's called Eilim, is Ein Seif. That means the worlds that are higher than Atzilus is so predominant that the Kalim are totally obliterated. It's as if they're not there. The light is so strong that the finitude and the diversity and the division and the form is overwhelmed by that light. Lower than Atzilus, it's the other way around. The vessels are so predominant, so preeminent, so strong, that the division and the complexity and the form hide the light, which is called Ein Seif. But Atzilus is neither. Atzilus is not the light overwhelming vessels. Atzilus is not vessels hiding light. Atzilus is convergence. The light meets the vessel and reveals itself. The vessel receives the light and asserts itself. In other words, Atzilus is a composite, it's a coming together of two very, very different things. The first is Ein Seif, which is plain and a reflection of the source and infinite and so on. And the second is Kalim, which are his Chalkos and Bahagbola and Betzir and so on. And in Atzilus, they converge. And like it says in Chassidus, that Atzilus is called Seif V'Gilui Elam Ein Seif. Atzilus is a place of revelation of Oyer and Keli. The light is revealing itself in a vessel and reflecting itself off a vessel, and neither the light becomes hidden nor the vessel becomes destroyed, they both stand their ground. So Atzilus is very important. So Atzilus is unique. Atzilus is the place of what's called Gilui of Ein Seif. Higher than Atzilus there's Ein Seif and there's no Gilui. Lower than Atzilus there's Helam of Ein Seif. And in Atzilus there's Gili of Ein Seif. Gili Ein Seif means how the light of Hashem, which is infinite, reflects itself, or for reality, which is finite and complex. And the Mekubalim have a very hard time understanding this. How can Atzilus exist? How can light, which is infinite, reach a vessel which is complex and limited and formed and divided and so on? And there are a bunch of shittas. Right? This is a classic discussion. It's called the Drush Gimel Shittas, the essay of the three opinions, which is the Tzemach Tzedek in Yonim, and it's based on the Pardes, one of the Sharim of the Pardes. I don't know what it is, Shar Vav, Shar Zayin. It's not hard to find, where the Pardes brings three Shittas. Now the first Shita and the second Shita are not complicated, but they're very hard to understand. And we're not going to be delving into the first and second Shita because we're concerned only with the third Shita. The first Shita is that how can Atzilus exist? How can light, which is infinite and plain, exist? And vessels that are complex and finite and formed coexist with them? The answer is because the light stops being Ein Seif. The light becomes limited, like the Keli, which is the Shita of the Ramar, Menachem Irikanti, the Maral Miprag, if you're familiar with Hamanus Elukus, Peri Gimel Dalet. The other Shita says that the Kelim are Maitzel, that vessels and Atzilus don't really exist. They're like oir. In other words, the first two Shitas resolve the question of the contradiction of Atzilus by making Atzilus into another world, which is like the worlds of Ein Seif, where the light predominates completely, or like Elam Abriya, where the Keli predominates completely. But they don't resolve the question of how two opposites, a light which is Ein Seif, can be revealed in a vessel which is finite. They don't resolve that question. Now understand, and the Rebbe has Maimorim, you have it Nayim Beis, in a lot of places where they'll always say that the Shita of the Mareches, which is the Shita says that the Kelim are Maitzel, and the Shita of the Ramad, the Rikanti, that says that the air which was Slabish and Kelim is a Nivdal, not a Netzal, is a creation, are also Torah. They're not mistakes. And you have to find a way of explaining Chochmas HaKabbalah according to those Shittas as well. And there are rare cases in Chassidus where they'll actually explain the concept of Chassidus according to the other two Shittas in Kabbalah. But as a rule, Chassidus Chabad brings the third Shita. And the third Shita basically is that the question is valid. That the idea that Oir is Ein Seif, and it's Pashut, and it's Echad, meets Keli, which is his Chalkus and Agbola and Tziyur and so on and so forth, are opposites. And because they're opposites, they should not be able to exist, remains the fact. In other words, before you answer the questions, you must assert that the question is valid. The later Mekubalim, the greatest Mekubalim, the Ramak and the Arizal, the third Shita is a combination of the Ramak and the Arizal, they hold that Atzilus is actually a convergence of two opposites. So we're back to square one. How can Atzilus exist? If Atzilus is Oyer, there can't be room for Gvul and Schalkus. If Atzilus has Gvul and Schalkus, there can't be room for a Gili of Ein Seif. Yet Ein Seif, Atzilus is a combination of both. Now the answer to this question is very, very, very involved. There's a very fancy word called kavana, which we're going to leave. There's another fancy word, not as fancy, but also a fancy word, which is called rotz. And then there's the obvious idea, which is called tzimtzum. Tzimtzum affects a change, not only in the keli, tzimtzum affects a change also in the yod. That although the yod is Ein Seif, and although the yod is pashut, and although the yod is echad, somehow tzimtzum harishin, the lashon which is brought from Kabbalah, is called hako'o. Az yibokak bekia, az yibokak hashachar erecha. The oid has to burst through the cheshach hatzimtzum. So although the oid, which comes after the tzimtzum, is still Ein Seif, still pashut, and still davuk, and still echad, and still bli gavul, the tzimtzum affected it in the kind of way that when it meets keli, keli should be able to receive it. And all of these ideas, the concept of kabbalah, the concept of ratzon, and most importantly the concept of tzimtzum, explain how it's possible that there should be a world called Atzilus, where the Eid is Ein Seif and revealed in a Keli which is Gvul and Ischalkus and Tziyur and so on. in this third shita that I just mentioned, that understands Atzilus as being a combination of opposites. The Eid and Keli Ataka opposites. But that there are a series of events that facilitate the meeting of the Eid and the Keli. There's actually two opinions. There's a machlekes. There's two shittas. And these two shittas are called Eidis Pshutim and Eidis Mitziyadim. The opinion that holds that the light is plain when it meets the Keli, and the opinion that holds that the light has a form when it meets the Keli. Now there is a lot of discussion about Siyud and Pshitus, and there's a lot of Maimorim on Siyud and Pshitus, and there's different degrees to which the question of Siyud and Pshitus is discussed. I'm going to share with you the question of Siyud and Pshitus as discussed in the Maimorim before the Hemshech Tafashayim Beis versus the Hemshech Tafashayim Beis. Because the Hemshech Tafashayim Beis, Hemshech Tera, the Hemshech Beshah, Shehekdemu Tera, the Hemshech Hayim Beis, the famous Hemshech Hayim Beis, is where the Rebbe Rashab asserts fully the sheet of Eidis Mitziyadim, and you have so many times in the Hemshech where he will say, Lefi Derush Zeh, where he will point out that this Hemshech is different than the Maimorim that come from before. In fact, there's a quote from the previous Rebbe that the Frierdiker Rebbe once told Rabbi Solnech, it's in Rabbi Solnech's biography, that you can't ask a kasha from a Maimah before Ayin Beis of the Maimorim and Ayin Beis because it's another linear, it's a different line. What's the difference between the pre-Ayin Beis Maimorim and the Maimorim of Ayin Beis and the post Ayin Beis Maimorim of the Rebbe Rashab, that before Ayin Beis it's after all Eidis Mitziyadim, and after Ayin Beis it's after all Eidis Pshutim. Okay? So I'm going to try my best and explain this to you to the best of my limited ability. If you hold Eidis Pshutim, that the light is plain, the very fact that the light will meet a vessel and go into a vessel and reveal itself to the vessel and reveal itself through the vessel and take on the character of the vessel means that this light had to have been prepared before by a kavanah, by a ratzon, by a tzimtzum, like I said. Because Eid ain't safe, what we call save of kalaman or helam, will never meet a keli, and will certainly not reveal itself in a keli, and will certainly not take on the form of a keli. So the Eid ain't safe has to be softened up, so to speak, has to be substantially prepared before it goes into the kelim of Atzilus, so that when it reaches the kelim of Atzilus, they should converge. Nevertheless, even though the Oid ain't safe, which is going to go into the kelim of Atzilus, goes through a bunch of steps of preparation before it reaches Atzilus. The kavona, the rotzen, the tzimtzum arishin, the bekia, as I described, in order to be able to come into the kelim of Atzilus in a way that it's revealed in the kelim of Atzilus. The oil that comes into the keli of Atzilus is still pashut. It's white light, as it were. It's plain, has no color, has no spheres, has no midas. When the oil goes into a keli, and the keli has character, or the keli has a midah, the keli has a sphere, or as sometimes it's brought in Chassidus from Kabbalah, the keli has a color, the light takes on the color of the keli. This is called Oireis Pshutim. The light, notwithstanding how much it's been changed by the various steps of Seder Ishtalshlos, before Atzilus, when the Oir meets the Keli, it's Oir Pashut, the light is plain. And, in as much as the light is concerned, the light continues to be plain, and that's why you have Takin Chasidus, that according to the Pardes, Ramak, the Shita of Oireis Pshutim, the mashal for the meeting of the light of Atzilus and the Kelim of Atzilus is like water in a colored glass, or light in a colored vessel. And the way it's explained in Chassidus is that when you put water into a colored glass, the water looks like it has a color. But the water does not have a color. It's still white, it's still plain even after it's sitting in the glass and being shown to you as a color. Because if you take that water out of the glass, it's plain again. In other words, the image is never fully imprinted on the light. It remains separate from it. And this is the pshit of Eides Pshutim. And Eides Pshutim, like I said to you before, is not mamish poshet, because the Eid goes through all kinds of steps in order to be able to meet the Keli altogether, but nevertheless, when the Eid goes into the Keli, it's Eides Pshutim. According to this opinion, there are two ideas that I must articulate. The first idea that I must articulate according to this opinion would be this. Since the oil is pashut and the keli is mitzuyah, when the oil goes into the keli becomes less of a keli. The oil which is pashut goes into a keli which is mitzuyah, mugbal, and mechulak, and it raises it up. In other words, a little bit, it's mavatal, it's tairu, it's hagbol, and it's chalkas. This is the idea that you learn in Chassidus, that in the shita of oireis pshutim, when the light of Ein Sof goes into the kelim of Atzilus, the kelim of Atzilus change, they shift from being gvul to being koyach hagvul. They're no longer limited, they're simply a possibility for limit, a potential for limit. And the way the Maamar explain it is that in Atzilus they're Ein Sof, outside of Atzilus they're going to be gvul. Since the oir is pashut, and the keli is mugbal, so although they get together and they meet, but it's a meeting between two things that are not entirely harmonious, not entirely compatible, and because they're not entirely harmonious, and because they're not entirely compatible, the oid raises the kli up. It takes away some of the limitation of the form of what the keli is. It goes from being gvul to being keich hagavul. This idea is classic. It's found in many Maamorim. And then when you get to the Hemshech Hayim Beis, in chapter 12, in Perikid Beis, you could look it up. The Rebbe Rashab says, after saying it many times in the years before the Hayim Beis, that it just simply doesn't make any sense. That's the first thing you need to know about the sheet of Eides Pshutim. If you hold the sheet of Eides Pshutim, when the Eir meets the Kli becomes less of a Metzias. That's number one. It's raised up. Number two is exactly the opposite of that. And what is that? If the Eir is Pashut, and the Keli is Mitzuyah, to whatever extent the Keli influences the Eir, to whatever extent the Sfiris, the Gavnim, the colors, the Midas, the Sfiris, that exist in Kelim have an impact on the Eir, that impact is affecting the Eir from something which is really limited. Because Kelim are limited, Sfiris are limited, Midas are limited. So if the Ein Sof is affected by a Keli which is Gvul and Hagbol and Eschalkos and Tziyud, in as much as the Eir is affected by that, the Eir becomes Eir HaGvul. And that's the other side of the coin of the Shita of Eides Pshutim, that to the extent that the Keli affects the Eir is not called Ein Sof, the Eir is called Eir HaGvul, or like it says in the Samach Vav, that it comes from the Keich HaGvul Shabi Ein Sof, not from the Keich HaBli Gvul Shabi Ein Sof. In other words, there are two anomalies about the meeting between Eir and Keli. One anomaly is the influence of Eir and Keli is that the Keli becomes less of a Gvul. And the influence of Keli on Eir, that in as much as the Keli affects the Eir's Hagbala is real. The Eir's limitation is real. Why? Because it's coming from something that's truly limited, the Keli, and truly formed, and truly divided, and so on and so forth. This is Ad Kan, the Shita Rishena of the Shita Shlishis, right? There's the third opinion, which holds that Atzilus is a combination of Ein Sof and Gevul, Gili Ein Sof and Gevul, which is not Maitzel, but Netzel, or Nivra even. But the Eid is Pashut, and the Keli is Mitzuyah. So when the two meet, in as much as the Eid affects the Keli, it stops being Gevul and becomes Keich HaGvul. And as much as the Keli affects the Eid becomes Mamish Gevul, as if it's a part of the Keich HaGvul system as opposed to the Keich HaBli Gvul system. Or to say it even higher, it's part of the Yecholte Shalei Lohayr system as opposed to the Yecholte Lohayr system. But now we move on to the second Shita, which is the Shita of Eretz Mitzayarim. The Shita of Eretz Mitzayarim is the Shita of the Hemshech Hayim Beis, and the way I understand it, this is the Shita of the Arizal, and it's a little bit deeper than the Shita of the Ramak. And this Shita holds that there's Sfiris in Eir. What that means basically is that in our imagination, in our understanding, there's an either or. If you're dealing with Ein Sof, if you're dealing with godliness, you are dealing with something that's absolutely plain and infinite. And if you're dealing with Adam, with Kalim, with worldliness, you're dealing with something which is limited and divided and formed and so on. But the Rebbe Rashab says there's a phenomenon called Ratzon, Hashem's will. And the phenomenon of Hashem's will, and again, like I said to you before, on a higher level than that, it's called kavana. If Hashem wills, there can be an Ein Sof that has a sfira. In other words, it's possible for Hashem to create a light, which is two opposites, mamish. It's Ein Sof on the one hand and it's sfiras on the other. But it's not that the Ein Sof and the Sfira aspects contradict each other. Because the Ein Sof and the Sfira aspect are not coming from two different places. It's not like the Ein Sof aspect comes from the Eir and the Sfira aspect comes from the Keli. The Ein Sof aspect and the Sfira aspect simply come from Hashem's will, from Ratzon. Hashem will. If Hashem wills, there can be an Eir which is both Ein Sof and Sfiras at the same time. Now, of course, when you learn the Ayin Beis, this is very difficult to understand. Because you ask yourself, is it Gvul or is it not Gvul? And the answer is, no, it's not Gvul, it's Tzir. But even though it's Tzir, it's Ein Sof, and it's Pshitas, and it's very, very difficult to resolve. But according to this Shita, Avenis Mitziyarim, as it turns out, you have three different things. Not two things, but three things. The first thing is Ein Sof, plain Ein Sof, the Pshitas of Ein Sof, which is like Seviv Kalamit. The second, of course, would be Gvul and Kalim, the Kalim themselves. And the third would be this middle pole, Eidos Mitziyarim. Eidos Mitziyarim means there's a light, that by the will of Hashem is both Ein Sof and Sfiras. Now, in order to explain this, the Maamarim, the Rebbe Rashab, introduces us to the Sugya of Shmaya Avtalion versus Hillel V'Shamai, which is a mashal, and the Nimshal is Achlifu Dachtaihu. In other words, the idea is that this Oyer, Mitzuyer, is not really Mitzuyer. But it's not really Pashat either. It's not so Mitzuyer so that it's possible to put Eira Chesed into Kli HaGvura and Eira Gvura into Kli HaChesed. But on the other hand, it's called Achlifu Dachtaihu. You are putting Eira Chesed into Kli HaGvura and Eira Gvura into Kli HaChesed. And this second Shita explains Atzilus in a much more harmonious way. And by the way, technically, right, the technical language would be the Ein Sof HaSeviv Kalamin is from Keich HaBali Gavul or Yecholte Elohoy. The Kalim and the Gvul are from the Keich HaGavul and Yecholte Shalei Elohoy. And this third pole, the Eid of Mamalak Kalam, the Eid HaKav, which is not created by Tzimtzum, but it's created by Ratzon, by the Eibishter himself, comes from both Yecholte Elohar and Yecholte Shalei Elohar. This says in the very beginning of Hemshech Tafresh Pei Poras from the Rebbe Rashab, page Daled, the page Hey, something like that. He says it explicitly. This sheet is very, very difficult to understand because it's hard to understand how Tzir and Pshitas can be in the same thing. How you have Oyer, Ein Sof, which is reflection of Hashem, which is what the concept of Ein Sof is, and at the same time it has a tendency towards a Midah, towards a Sfira. And like I said, they used the mashal from Shmai Naftal Hillel V'Shamai and Achlifa Dachtaihu. But after you finish learning it, you're as frustrated as when you started. It's very hard to understand how both can be together. But what's gained in this sheet is that you have a much more harmonious Atzilus. It's called Tikkun Shebetikkun rather than Tayu Shebetikkun. Why? Because when the Oyed of Atzilus goes into the Keli of Atzilus, they're not opposites. The Oyed of Atzilus is Chesed. And when it goes into the Kli HaChesed, there's a harmony. So in this Shita, the two things I said to you before, you don't need to say. When the oil goes into the Keli does not become Keich HaGavul. The Keli, instead of the Keli becoming bottled by the oil, the Keli brings the oil down. Now, according to Shitas Harizal, Atzilus is not Keich HaGavul, Atzilus is Gavul Mamish. And that's how they explain the Pirkei Echol, Tzir, Kem, B'Sheitze, Bereishes, Ereish, Tam, Vav, Elef, Alaf, Mediv, Voice, Parsois. That Atzilus is literally Gvul. Because since the Eid is Mitzuyad, even though it's Ein Sof, it can be Beslabish in the Gavul Mamish. So according to this opinion, when the Eid meets the Keli, it's not Mavatal the Keli, it's Mislabish in the Keli, it joins with the Keli, it becomes one with the Keli. On the other hand, when the Keli meets the Eid, it doesn't make the Eid into Gvul Mamish, because the Keli is not impressing the Tzir on the Oid. The Oid has a Tzir of its own. So what have I done in the last, long time? I just gave you a whole speech. What I've done in the last 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes is this. Number one, I told you that there's three opinions about how to understand the meaning of Ein Sof and Gvul, which is Atzilus. The first two opinions are extremes, that the Kelim are not really Gvul, or the Eid is not really Ein Sof. And the third Shita, which is itself two Shitas, is the combination of the Ramak and the Arizal, which is that the Eid goes through all kinds of changes to meet Keli. But according to the Shitas HaPardis, the Eid is mit Poshet. And therefore, when the Eid meets Keli, from the Eid half, the Keli stops being Gvul and becomes Keich HaGvul. And from the Keli half, the Eid becomes Gvul Mamish, because its Gvul comes from something other than itself, from the Reshimu, from the Keli. And according to the second Shita of Eidis Mitzuyarim, because there is Sfiris and Eid by itself, when the Eid meets Keli, the Keli brings the Eid down, so Atzilus can actually be real Gvul. And when the Eid meets Keli, the Keli is not changing the Eid into being Gavul, because the Eid has its status of its own. And there's one more little detail here, I'm just going to say this very quickly, that in this second Shita, that's why the Arizal holds that Iyu v'chayei echad is Gimel Rishenis, or Chochma, and Iyu v'gamei echad is Zayin Tachtenis, or Bina. Because Iyu v'chayei and Iyu v'garmoi don't mean Eid and Keli. They mean Aliyah and Amshach. Iyu v'chayei echad means that the Eid raises the Keli up. Gamei Echad means that the Keli brings the air down. This can only be said in the sheet of Eidus Mitzuyarim, because the sheet of Eidus Pshutim, Ein Sof, can never be brought down by Keli. It can only be raised up. Now, what's my point? Why did I give you this whole speech? I gave you this whole speech because I want to segue into the following idea. When we learn Hasidus, we're trying to understand very spiritual things, very metaphysical things, very ruchniistic things. And we're not just trying to visualize them, we're not just trying to imagine them, we're trying to understand them. Right? What's called in the writings, Idiyas HaMetzias. It's not so easy to understand. So learning Hasidus is not easy. Because learning Hasidus is not about understanding what's written on the page. Learning Hasidus is that what's written on the page and that you mathematically figure out, you should be able to understand it. Understanding Ein Sof, understanding godliness is not an easy thing. You have a combination of so many different mishalim. I take a little piece from this mashal, a little piece from this mashal, a little piece from this mashal. And then you need to create a visualization in your imagination, where you understand the concept of Ein Sof. And ultimately, this is what it comes down to. It's possible for a person to understand limitation, because we are limitation. It's possible for a person to understand form and division and detail, because we are form and division and detail. It's even possible for a person to relate to plainness, pshutas of Ein Sof. Even though we don't experience plainness, but we can understand the idea that Hashem is one, and even though everything comes from Him, in Him there's no detail, and therefore a light, an emanation, a gilui, which is a reflection of Him, is going to be pashut. What's impossible to understand, or almost impossible to understand, is how these two can be together. How you can have tziyur and pshitus in the same thing, form and formlessness in the same thing. So if you say that the form comes from one place and the formless comes from another place, so you're saying form and formless cannot be in one place. It's a convergence of opposites, and there's an interface. One meets the other and affects the other in this way. The other meets the first and affects the first in the other way. But there's no such thing as tziyur and pshitas in one circumstance. But you see, in the last shita, in the shita of Eidus Mitzuyarim, you do have a combination of pshitas and tziyur. You have a combination of form and formless in the same way, with a special emphasis that the tziyur and pshitas and the oid is not coming from two different places. The gavul aspect is not coming from the keich ha-gavul, and the bli gavul aspect is not from the keich ha-bli gavul. They're both coming from Ratz. Hashem created an oid, Ein Sof, Ein me'ein ha-moed, a reflection of Him. It's a revelation of godliness, dveikas, that is both Ein Sof, because He is Ein Sof, and the oid is me'ein ha-moed. and Pshit and Tzir. This is very difficult to comprehend. It's very difficult to understand. And like I said, there's Mishalim to explain, the mashal of an idea. You say an idea in a very abstract level. And 5 different people, this the mashal of Shmai Naftal, Hil, and Vishame, which is found in the Maamar of Nosei, in Ayin Beis, where this idea is introduced. 5 different students understand it in 5 different ways. Sometimes we'll understand it in contradictory ways, like Beshah and Beis Hillel. So which one did you say? Did you say what this one is saying, or this one is saying, or this one is saying? If not all of them are repeating what you're saying, they're not your students. And if all of them are repeating what you're saying, and all of them are your students, how could it be so divergent? And the answer is because when the teacher speaks on the level of the abstract, even though he's saying something, when the abstract becomes applied, it radiates in different directions. So everything each of the students says, the teacher says, even though in the students they're so divergent, and in the teacher they're unified. This is a mashal brought in Ayin Beis for Eidos Pshut, that Shmai and Naftalian taught, and Hillel and Shammai argued, and Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued even more. And both of them were quoting Shmai and Naftalian. Because Shmai and Naftalian's ideas were so abstract that although they were leaning towards form, but their abstractness tolerated, it included forms that are so distinctive that are almost opposites, like Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So Eidos Pshuta means a light is a reflection of Ein Seif, and it has some kind of a form, but the form as it exists in the light, which is Ein Seif, is so fine that even though it is a form, it's not a form which is limited. It's a form which is limited and not limited at the same time. It can tolerate an opposite. That's why you have the concept in Kabbalah of Achlifu D'chtayu, only in this Shita really. The Eira Chesed goes into the Kli HaGevura, and the Eira Gevura goes into the Kli HaChesed. But any person who's learned Ayin Beis and has paid attention gets to the Maamar of Nosei, which is the 4th Maamar of the Hemshech Ayin Beis. It starts in Perek Yud Beis and goes to Perek Yud Zayin. And it's really, that's the foundation of the Hemshech Ayin Beis. And the Rebbe Rashab repeated it twice. He said it, I think, Shavuos and Nosei, or Nosei and Baalei Yisrael. And he said it twice. I wasn't in Lubavitch. I don't remember. I wasn't born yet. Right? My grandfather was 10 years old when this happened. But I suspect that the Rebbe Rashab repeated it twice because it's hard to understand. Because it's a fundamental mime. The idea that you can have something which is in and of itself, without an outside influence. In other words, it's not 2 influences affecting 2 opposite things, but one influence that simultaneously allows for to be Pashut and to be Mitzuyah is very, very difficult for us to comprehend. Now, why did I say everything that I just said? I said everything that I just said for the following reason. When you learn Chassidus, and you study Sfiris, study Kav, study B'malei Kalam, and you're learning Hemshech Ayin Beis, and you understand, or you try to understand, you assert effort at understanding how there can be Sfiris and Oyer by the Oyer itself, it pales in comparison to the concept of Pnimius that our Maamar is going to be teaching. Our Maamar is also going to present us with the same idea. How did I start tonight's class? I started tonight's class by announcing that in this Maamar there's a Chitzonius and a Pnimius, as if the world has 2 layers. The world as Hashem created it, and the world that was influenced by the man who's at the bottom of the heap and radiating his countenance upward, Leiva Adam ala Adam, Kamayim upon him, and higher. And the idea that the Rebbe is going to teach us is that the Adam HaTachten, the form of man below and the form of man above, is going to impress itself on the Pshitas of Ein Seif, and the Pshitas of Ein Seif is going to reflect itself back. The Pshitas of Ein Seif reflects itself back what was looked into it, what we impressed upon it. We're Adam, we're Tzir, we're Gvul, we're Ischalkus. And the Adam, the Tzir, the Gvul, the Ischalkus was impressed on the Ein Seif. And the Ein Seif differ gives back that Tzir. But the Rebbe is going to argue that the Ein Seif that gives back that Tzir is absolutely Ein Seif. And the reason the Ein Seif that gives back that tzir is absolutely Ein Seif is because the tzir is coming from someplace else, from outside of the Ein Seif. And because it's come from outside of the Ein Seif, in the Ein Seif the tzir does not exist at all, even though the tzir is being reflected. Now we're going to learn this Maamar, and we're going to struggle with this Maamar. We're going to have a difficulty understanding the words. We're going to have a difficulty understanding simply the flow of the Maamar. But ultimately, the hardest thing to understand in this Maamar, besides the idea of Yisrael Ola B'Machshava, which we talked about in the last year, that the foundation of all of creation is Adam HaGashmi, doing Teira Mitzvahs Ne'el Mazeh HaGashmi, and fulfilling the Ratzon HaElyon, is the concept of Pshitus and Tzir in Oir. Because that's what this Maamar is going to teach us. That creation imprints itself on the Ein Seif. And when creation imprints itself on the Ein Seif gives back to the creation that imprint. And that imprint is a reflection of what the creation is, in other words, tzir, and at the same time it's Ein Seif mamish. How pashut is the Ein Seif, which is giving back, which is reflecting back the imprint that creation impressed upon the Ein Seif, it's more pashut than Yechelis. It's more pashut than shemis and shem. Now, of course, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can't possibly understand. If you're familiar with the language of Yechelis, of shem and shemis, you understand how incredibly profound this is. But what I am telling you is that in this Maamar, when you learn it through from beginning to end, you get the clear impression that there's, so to speak, two layers to the world, the chitzonius layer. Included in the chitzonius layer is the world with all of its form. Included in the chitzonius layer is the meeting of Eid and Keli and Atzilus, which is really the meeting between formless and form. Included in the chitzonius level is even the meeting between Eid and Keli, formless and form, and it's understood in the sheet of Eidus Mitzayadim. But even that pales in comparison to the convergence of opposites of Tziyur and Pshitas of Ein Seif and Tziyur, as our Maamar is going to propose. The Kamayim Aponim Laponim Ken Leiv Adam Ala Adam. The plainness of Ein Seif reflects back Adam. And the reflected Adam is so pashut, it's even more pashut than the Madreg of Yechelis, the Madreg of Shem, the Madreg of Shemis, which is so abstract and so pashut. And nevertheless, this is even more pashut than that. So we have our work cut out for us. We have a work cut out for us, first of all, because pashut, to understand the ebb and flow of this Maamar is very complicated. But after we finish all of those complexities, the higoyen of the convergence of tzir and pshitas in this model, which the Rebbe calls pnimius, we're not going to understand it, but we want to dance around it. We want to circle it. We want to come closer to appreciating how much we don't understand it, how profound it is. I just want to show you. I just want to show you the words. And I'm going to finish right now. If you look on page H, pay test, yes, which is what I showed you earlier, look at the first paragraph of Sif Test. Read the last two lines. Listen to this. There's something called Esesfiras Agnuzis. There's a lot of levels of Esesfiras Agnuzis. We're going to talk about all those things in Mitzvah Hashem. But here we're talking about Esesfiras Agnuzis. We have Esesfiras in Oyer. Esesfiras in Oyer. Now, Esesfiras in Oyer, according to the sheet of Eidos Pshutim, is not exactly Esesfiras, right? But Esesfiras in Oyer, according to the sheet of Eidos Mitzayadim, is Esesfiras in Oyer. And nevertheless, he says, B'chitzayni yisinyanim hu yecheles l'sfiras. It's sfiras at least on the level of yecheles. Ubepnimius em ein seif. And the pnimius is that it's sfiras and ein seif mamish. So I've given you my introductions. Yesterday's introduction was basic, gishmak, and easy. Today's introduction was involved and scholarly. I apologize if it was hard for you to follow, and if you were able to follow, I believe I gave you something real, substantive, honest, and ready to start the Maamar Mitzvah Hashem. And we'll do this next time.